Hey Brad, what have you been thinking about today?
Today I'm thinking about what it means to bear God, bear God's image, and with Advent coming up, what it means and meant for Mary to bear God into this world.
Great. You want to freestyle on that for a bit?
I think I do.
Freestyle Theology is sponsored by Daily Breath, the Christian meditation app that really works. Learn more at dailybreath.app.
All right, we're back.
So Advent is upon us, and the church calendar starts, so to speak. So there's lots of different. I mean, we talk about with Advent. It seems like is it just a lead up to Christmas, or it's like a preparation for Christmas? But you've been thinking about the idea of bearing. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, Advent is, I don't know about you in your experience with church and such, but I always find that Advent is this time of year when Christians get kind of artistically hungry. You ever notice that? It's like
Hmm.
even in a lot of churches that they don't really follow the church calendar at all, Advent is one of those few things that they're like, what are we doing for Advent? What's the series about? It's sort of like a poetically packed season. That's what I find. A lot of really interesting liturgies and artwork. Mary as the Theotokos, the mother of God or the bearer of God. That word just really got me thinking this week. And there's a variety of reasons, and I was thinking we could talk about that. We bear the image of God, and Mary bore Jesus or bore God. And so, I started digging into the word and thinking about all the different ways that the word is used. And I think there's some interesting stuff to talk about with each other.
So when you say bear, we bear the image of God. The first thing that I think from not just all that I've kind of read, but a lot of sermons I preach, there's like this flinch to go back to like, hey, we're really bad, we're wicked, we're sinful, but like, hey, don't forget. In spite of that, like but we're of utmost value. We have infinite value because we are created in God's image. And so there's a sense where it's like, I think that's where like the flinch is to go back to that to hey, we're super valuable because we bear God's image. I guess I don't want to say that's not true or right or valid, but like it feels like there's more. I've just been like scratching over the last years. It feels like you're getting at some of this. Like there's more to that when it says we bear the image of God. There's more to it than just therefore you have infinite worth. Like you're super valuable, so protect life. So which all that's great, right? What is there anything to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. You're kind of highlighting some of the tensions that exist in our like typical sort of Christian messaging that we receive. And there is like mixed messaging. You know, I'm sure in some systematic theology, there's a careful, differentiation between our worth as the bearers of God's image and our wickedness and our sinfulness. But in practice, it seems to be a lot of mixed messaging. You start the line between our infinite worth and
Hmm.
our total depravity is strangely blurry because most of life is lived in the middle of those two, you know?
Huh.
And so I don't know, different Christian traditions emphasize different things, but the Protestant tradition has really emphasized our wickedness and depravity. But don't worry, you are ultimately of infinite worth. But then there's those really, in my view, really unhealthy views, which is, I think it's Martin Luther's quote. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but the whole we are dung covered in gold, something like that. And I'm just like, that is a repulsive image. Have you ever
Huh.
heard that?
No, I haven't.
Dung covered in gold. And it's just like that. All I can think of is inside of that gold is, you know,
Dung.
yeah, that's what it really is.
Because with so much when we think about we're thinking am I like these two ideas or prince it's like the idea of me being of infinite worth, image of God, and the idea of me being wicked, fall, rebellion. But it's like it's these two ideas. And then you said that like we're living then we struggle to live in the tension of that. But the idea is like the problem is those are ideas, principles, they're not or theological categories. It's not a story. That's what
Mm,
it like when we talk about like creation, rebellion, they're not theological categories. They're their acts in a story, their movements, they're the movement of the story that we're in the midst of. And so
Right.
somehow it feels like that tension drifts away. And yeah, so then specifically like with that image of God thing in Genesis 1, it's almost like there's not, when he creates them in his image, it's a part of a story. He's doing something as he's created everything that there is, and now he creates these people. And it's almost like more for purpose than just like he makes them worth more gold than the other animals. It's like that's not what makes them different than image of God. More gold, they cost more gold, more silver, more whatever. It's like no, they have a different purpose than everything else in creation as they bear God's image and reflect it back to him. And then it becomes it's a part of an ongoing narrative, an ongoing story. So like we're bearing, so to go with your bearing word, like
Mhm.
we bear his image in the midst of this world, in the midst of this story that's ongoing.
Yeah, something that I was thinking about was we bear God's image, and that's a whole book or volume of books itself, right? And people have discussed all the implications of what that really means for thousands of years, like what all the implications of that are. Some people have emphasized, our capacity to reason. Some people have emphasized our capacity to build relationships, the Trinity, so we're relational by nature or something like that. Other people have emphasized the functional qualities of God's image, that it helps us understand why we do what we do.
So that's helpful. That's what I was just talking about. Like that's the piece that's grabbed a hold of me. And I'm like, and that's helpful for me even like, oh, that's an aspect of God's image that's really gained traction for me and helped but it's not the totality. And I don't want to like crap on everybody else who has different emphases, but like that's helpful.
But that's the weird thing, is so much of in Christian history, again, in the West, which is usually what I'm talking about, unless I say otherwise, just because that's more what I know. But this obsession with kind of finding the aspect of aspects, finding the one that undergirds everything else. And
the right answer.
Yeah. And that is just not the default way that's not like the pursuit anymore. And I'm really glad for that. I actually don't know how well I would have fared as a scholar in an earlier time, because I'm obsessed with like the never ending dimensionality of life, how there's always something more to be said.
So is this postmodernism? Like how is this, when you say that, like anymore, there's not just one truth, like I'm hearing like somebody coming back against you saying like, oh, or just writing like, oh, that's just postmodern, like you've just given it a postmodernism.
Yeah. And
we're getting way far afield of our topic in this podcast. Continue on.
right. But that's how we do.
That's how we do it.
Postmodernism, whatever that is, I would, again, like I said last week, that's kind of what I know. It's what I grew up in. But I wonder how it would be different if instead of calling it postmodernism or relativism, if we kind of created more categories. And so I would say that I'm a practitioner of multidimensional perspectivism, that a thing can be and should be, especially a thing in God's world, whether it's a concept or something physical or some kind of, aspect of reality, should be analyzed and looked at from every possible angle. And the fact that there's always another angle to look at doesn't diminish the thing. It's just it's a many, many, many-sided shape, every single thing in reality. And so is that postmodernism? Maybe, but it also just seems like having a empathetic and open perspective onto God's world. Something that I often say is that I don't think the truth can mean anything, but it can mean many things. I think that having the relativist critique, it always wants to kind of shut the process down and return to some older answer that someone figured out in the past to something. No, we shouldn't veer off. We need to go back to this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I don't see what the point of that, because a lot of the time going back, it makes it uninteresting and irrelevant to people right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's why what you're talking about with the story, so understanding scripture as the story and couching our understanding of the image of God within that story, Um, a story can be told anywhere, over and over again,
Hmm.
and it can come to have new meaning, new dimensions get unlocked, right? And so, like reading Jesus's life, for example, with kind of an eye to what's going on psychologically, that is a really rich endeavor. So
I'll
is
tell
like
you,
economically, stuff like that.
it's it. We would do. I've probably done this 50 or more times, but I get a group of 5 to 30 people, and we sit around for like 6 hours. So I can do it over 1 or 2 days. We call it Story of God. And so basically, there's 19 stories going from creation, from the beginning to the end, kind of picking out 19 stories, and I'll tell the story, and then I'll just do dialogue on it. So I ask, what do you learn about God in this story? What strikes you in this? Why do you think this happened? Why do you think how did that? And the rules are like nobody one, you can't go outside of the story. You can't bring outside information in. So you could have someone with a PhD or someone who's never read the Bible before. They're starting from the same. You can only say what I've talked about. And then you can never go forward. So you can't go forward in the story. You just have to stay there. And so we're all on the same page and we're learning it together. And
Mm,
so I said this, I've done this like 50 times or more. And every time we do it, we go through the story, like different things get drawn out. And I always say this at the beginning when I'm laying out the instructions on how to do this to everybody. I said, hey, I'm just telling you now, I've done this so many times. I've done this all different groups of people, with pastors, with homeless people, with all mixed groups, all these, like all sorts of things. And I was like, every time there will be a moment where somebody will say something in response to the story. And I'm going to say, whoa, I've never thought about that before. I've never heard that before. Nobody's ever put it that way or
yeah.
drawn out that insight. And that's what exactly what you're saying. Like when you just said, I'm like, yes, that's what happens in the story. Every time is different, but it's all true to the story. It's not like we're just making this thing up. We trust the story, and the story unfolds different things.
And that's what because my studies are in indigenous Christianity. So in North America, indigenous peoples encountering missionaries, but also indigenous forms of Christianity. That's kind of my main scholarly interest. And I always think about what it would have been like had the main form of, evangelism, if you want to call it that, had just been telling this story, struggling to tell the story of the gospel around the campfire using new language, kind of in tandem with learning the language and kind of trying to understand the people and their stories,
Uh-huh.
and really working to connect things. And the earliest missionaries, at least in the Great Lakes area where I'm from, the Jesuits, they did that to an extent.
Hmm.
They definitely did that to an extent. They learned indigenous languages and lived among the people, and they were seen as very odd. The Jesuits were seen as very strange and kind of like weirdly antisocial
Hmm.
because of their commitment to celibacy and such. They were seen as very, yeah, just kind of odd characters.
Hmm.
But some of that stuff did happen, but that was a short-lived phase before the real desire for land kind of took over the colonists.
Wow.
So, but yeah, I always imagine like, what would it have been like just that struggle to tell that story around a campfire,
Hmm.
and what kind of things, new hybrids, new meldings and new insights, that phrase you said, in that drawing out insights.
Hmm.
I love that sort of metaphor for
Hmm.
what it means to analyze. The word analyze sounds so, well, analytical, clinical, and cold, right? Applying reason to a situation. It just feels like, let's
Hmm.
distill the facts from this.
Hmm.
But instead of analysis, I love words like exploration, or my favorite is probably excavation. I love to excavate a
Hmm.
thing, whether it's God's word or the world in some way or some historical event. And to excavate is to sort of take this irreducible, super complex view of creation, that there is never a final word on anything.
Hmm.
There's always more. And that just seems true to me of God's creation, this infinite richness.
All right, let's get back to Advent, about bearing.
Right.
Tell me, we talked last week and you just riffed for a second, and I was like, whoa. But so put that together. We bear the image of God. Mary was the God bearer. Yeah. What is that? Why is that standing out to you?
All right. Why it's standing out to me, and this is where I'm going to hit a wall where I don't actually really know what it is I want to say. So the thing that's been jumping out at me is this, that to bear something is often painful. To bear something, it's connected to the word burden. And
Hmm.
so I guess I kept thinking, we bear God's image. Is that, in a sense, a burden? Is that, in a sense, something heavy? Something that that's the word that just kept coming to me is, and the reason that I was thinking about that is this, you know, we work on the daily breath meditation, and I'm working really hard to sort of create what I think is a new synthesis, sort of melding the insights in mindfulness with what I know and the insights from the Christian faith.
Hmm.
And something I learned in my studies this week was that mindfulness, this is a mistake I had made. I thought mindfulness was about learning how to feel better, learning how to
Uh,
feel more calm. That's
uh-huh.
what I really thought the point of it was, which is why I got interested in it, because of struggling with anxiety. So I was like, oh, mindfulness, that can make me feel happier, calmer, better.
That's what I often try to do. When I think about that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to lay down and I'm going to try to breathe, notice my breathing and calm it, and then try to relax every muscle, like body scan to like relax every muscle in my body. Whereas what I've been therapists and other people like what I've realized is like, oh, that's a part of it. That can be a part. But it's actually like to notice, not just to calm down, but to notice what's going on in your body and notice what's going on in your surroundings. Be present.
Totally. And then after, that first stage of learning how to notice what's around you right now, and then what's in you, what's in your body, then that next stage is learning to notice your own thought stream,
Hmm.
which notice the loops that you're in, which come, you might think these are all original thoughts. I remember learning that, I don't remember the percentages, but it was something astronomical, like something like 80% of the thoughts you think today, you are the same thoughts you thought yesterday.
Huh.
And so we're on these loops. And so mindfulness teaches us how to start to notice those.
Huh.
And it's kind of like once you notice something, once you give something a name, shine a light on it, it's like it's not as scary as it used to be. It doesn't hold that grip on you in the same way.
Hmm.
But this is all to say, what I learned in my studies was that kind of feeling calm and stuff like that, that's a byproduct. That's not the point of meditation. And the psychotherapist I was listening to, kind of explaining it, said that mindfulness increases our capacity to bear difficult thoughts and feelings.
Huh.
So it's kind of like it expands us, it makes us aware. And so it doesn't shy away from
Is it okay?
depression.
Let me. Is it because those difficult thoughts and feelings are there, but we just get on a loop? We get in a trance. We get in just continuing on the same 80% loop. Like we just stay comfortable there, so we actually can't even bear it and bring it to be like
In a
in the
way,
present.
we don't stay comfortable, we stay uncomfortable there, but we run and hide. Because I was
Which
wondering,
I think
how
is
does
helpful.
mindfulness help with depression? Because I had an idea, which I think is now a little mistaken, of why it helped with anxiety. Because I thought, oh, noticing, kind of bringing yourself back to the present moment takes you out of the catastrophic future you're worrying about. So that made sense to me. But then I thought, why does it help with depression then? Because depression isn't a catastrophic future. It's like a hopelessness about the future, kind of based on the past.
Hmm.
And what I'm learning is, since mindfulness teaches us to not avoid the painful feelings and thoughts, but to notice them and watch them as they come and go, it really is like an exposure treatment. Exposure treatment for fears, for phobias and stuff. Like
Ah.
if you're like have a phobia of
Ah.
snakes or
Spiders.
something,
Yeah.
spiders,
Be
to,
exposed to them.
yeah. And exposure therapy really does work. It teaches
Ah.
us that we're not in danger, especially of those things that we're actually not in danger of.
Uh huh.
So mindfulness, in a way, is kind of like a meditation exposure, because as you first learn to focus, you learn the skills of focus and concentration. especially by looking at the breath and then your senses and then what's around you. You learn how to focus. Then you can start to focus on your own feelings and thoughts. That's kind of stage 2. And yeah, so by not avoiding those painful thoughts and feelings, just by noticing them, you don't have to, not, it's not, mindfulness isn't really teaching us how to solve our problems, just to watch it and see how it comes and goes, and how we're on these loops. It increases it's like we grow larger, our awareness grows larger, while the thought stays the same size. The feeling doesn't grow larger. It actually shrinks, especially the negative ones, the more you watch them and look at it. And so that's where this Advent thought came. Mindfulness increases our capacity to bear difficult feelings and thoughts. And that word just hit me. I was like, oh, bear. We bear God's image. The God bearer, one of Mary's great titles. And then just the word born, to be born. That's the past tense of bear, So childbearing, the word just kept flying around in all the different ways we use it. And all of them have some kind of heaviness or maybe responsibility associated with them,
So what does this mean? What could this mean for you as you hit Advent? Yeah, for you, as you're thinking about this, like, what does that actually mean for you this Advent?
I don't know if this answers the question, because I don't know if our listeners notice, but I almost never do. I am not very good at answering any question directly. I'm like, oh, great question. Let's walk through this forest again. But a thought that I used to have, a thing that used to stump me even when I was a teenager was, especially, when I was struggling with ideas of things like hell and evil. And I remember thinking, or learning about how because of our sinful nature, we're damned by default or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of going back into old patterns of thinking because I haven't really gone down those roads in a long time. But I remember thinking it seemed unfair to me because I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to exist. And so God literally made me exist. And here I was being asked to, believe a certain thing in order to avoid eternal damnation. It just seemed very unfair and bizarre. And there was something about of unreality to it. There's that can't be how the logic works, And I actually do still believe that can't really be how the logic works. But that's a topic for another time. But kind of maturing a little bit, we don't ask to be born. We don't ask to bear God's image. And yet here we are, and yet we do. And so there's something about the burden of responsibility that is thrust upon us simply by existing.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes back to what I was wondering about earlier is bearing the image of God or God's likeness in some way painful or a burden. And then, of course, with Advent, that really comes to, a new intensity where God himself bears the image of God in Jesus, bearing the sins of the world, all that kind of thing, bearing God's image in the world in a way that we had never seen before, in a full way. Mm-hmm. And obviously pain, suffering was part of that journey. And then before that with Mary.
Yep.
With Mary's bearing God, a lot of not just physical pain, but of course that, right? With bearing a child and carrying a child, but also the social stigma, all that, the fear, the anxiety.
Just linking this, there's so many links I have. One though, your point that we didn't ask to be born, yet we carry this responsibility or bear the image of God. Mary didn't ask to bear the Messiah. She didn't ask to bury Jesus, but she did, and she took that responsibility.
That's right. It's kind of here's what's going to happen. And that is in a way similar to just being born. Yeah. It's here's what's going to happen. So in that sense, connecting with what I was talking about with the mindfulness stuff is, I think I would like to learn how to increase my capacity to bear God's image
Huh.
In more of its dimensions, in a deeper way, something like that, rather than God's image, kind of like what you were saying earlier, rather than just being some aspect of our nature, kind of in that Greek philosophical category
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, I was even thinking back what you were talking about, the loops we get in, and thinking, wow, maybe if I took this Advent, if I really thought this Advent it was intentional about, hey, I want to more fully bear the image of God and that responsibility. And to do that, I have to be the exposure. I have to be exposed to what are the things I'm not being exposed to because of those loops. So how can I use prayer, meditation, whatever it is? How can I use these tools, gifts, to intentionally like, no, I'm going to intentionally try to slow that and yeah, and get out of that loop. Then it's the pain, the burden, but I'm exposed to that. I'm dealing with that, but then I'm freed from just being on that loop or staying in that trance, and then I can be opened up to more fully bear God's image.
Absolutely. And one of the main images that Brielle and I have been working with for the last year is when it comes to, let's just say, good and evil. We are in the West dualists by default. We just are. Even in the streams of Christianity where we really push against dualism, we're often still dualists because that's the air we breathe. And so we kind of talk about good and evil as if they're, one's like the dark side and one's the light side, and they're kind of equal and in battle and stuff like that. But I remember, have you read the Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis's book? And I just remember that image from it where I think it was near the end of the book, and he talked about how he talked about hell as something very, very, very small. I think he said it was so small that it could be eaten by a bird, like it was the size of a seed. And that image struck me at a subnumal level. That's a word I just invented, which is the spiritual version of subconscious, where it's like something goes on deep, deep down in the spirit, even if you're not aware of what's happening in your intellect. And I think from that moment on, I realized that evil was small and good was large. And it's instead of them being two sides of a coin, And so it's the thing that Brielle and I have been really working with is this notion of outgrowing. So instead of resisting temptation and pushing against, our, negative tendencies and fighting against all those kind of images that assume some kind of equality between good and evil, what if we outgrew our fears and anxieties, just like that mindfulness stuff, and we became, so we kind of like, they fell off us because they could no longer wrap themselves around us. Yeah, outgrowing as the new kind of image for maturing, I guess.
Okay, we're running up against some time here. So we're going to end it here. That's incredible. And at a later date, we are going to do either another episode or a series of episodes about that image of outgrowing as far as like sanctification or sin, sanctification, that sort of thing. That's incredible. Like that just blew my mind. So we're going to wrap it up right there. Brad,
sounds good.
Thanks for chatting. You want to do this again?
Yeah, I was thinking we should do this again, maybe next week.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.
Freestyle Theology is sponsored by Daily Breath, the Christian meditation app that really works. Learn more at dailybreath.app. That's daily, BREATH.app. Or try it for free by downloading it in the Apple App Store or on Google Play.